Thank you, Chairman Risch, and thank you for your very kind words. I would also like to thank Ranking Member Menendez for his opening statement and distinguished members of the committee. I've appeared before this committee a number of times, but it's mostly been in private. And so I'm very happy to have an opportunity to have a discussion on Iran in a public setting. I have a longer prepared statement that I've submitted, but why don't I go over some parts of that submitted statement. We have implemented an unprecedented pressure campaign, and it has two objectives. One is to deny the regime the revenue that it needs to fund a revolutionary and expansionist foreign policy. The other one is to increase the incentives for Iran to come to the negotiating table. And if you look at the history, the 40-year history that the United States has had with this republic and other nations have had, you see a consistent pattern that you need to have either economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, or the threat of military force. It's one or more of these factors are what inform Iran's decision-making calculus. And we have kept our foreign policy squarely within the left-right limits of economic pressure and diplomatic isolation. The President has also repeatedly expressed the United States' willingness to negotiate with Iran. And we are willing to meet with the Iranians without preconditions. We are seeking a comprehensive deal, and it needs to address four areas. It needs to address, in a very comprehensive way, the threats that Iran presents to international peace and security. And that is their nuclear program, their missile program, its support to terrorist groups and proxies that I can share today. While the United States was still in the JCPOA, Iran expanded its ballistic missile activities to partners across the region, including Hezbollah, Palestinian terrorist groups, and Shia militias in Iraq. Beginning last year, Iran transferred whole missiles to a separate designated terrorist group in the region. Iran is continuing to develop missile systems and related technology solely for export to regional proxies. And while we were in the JCPOA, Iran increased its support to Hezbollah, helping them produce a greater number of rockets and missiles. This arsenal is then used to target our ally, Israel. Beyond continuing advancements to its missile program, Iran was also deepening its engagement in regional conflicts. Also, under the Iran nuclear deal, Iran was given a clear pathway to import and export dangerous weapons. 2 days from now, on October 18th, we will be exactly 1 year away from the expiration of the United Nations arms embargo on Iran. Because of the Iran nuclear deal, countries like Russia and China will soon be able to sell conventional weapons to Iran. The UN Security Council needs to renew the arms embargo on Iran before it expires. We have made this a priority. The Secretary has visited the UN Security Council now 2 or 3 times to highlight the expiration date of the arms embargo. Today, by nearly every measure, the regime and its proxies are weaker than when our pressure began. Shia militant groups in Syria have stated to the New York Times, this was in March, that Iran no longer has enough money to pay them as much as they have in the past. There was one Shia fighter who said the golden days are gone and they're never coming back. Iran just doesn't have the money that it used to. Hezbollah and Hamas have enacted unprecedented austerity plans due to a lack of funding from Iran. In March, Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah went on TV and said Hezbollah needed public support to sustain its operation. And in various parts of Lebanon, you can see piggy banks in grocery stores soliciting spare change from Lebanese citizens to support Hezbollah's operation. We are also making it harder for Iran to expand its military capabilities. Beginning in 2014, Iran's military budget increased every year through to 2017, when it hit nearly $14 billion. However, from 2017 to 2018, when our pressure went into effect, we saw a reduction in military spending of nearly 10% in the first year, and in Iran's 2019 budget, which was announced in March, there was a 28% cut to their defense budget. And this includes a 17% cut for IRGC funding. Because of our sanctions, Iran will be unable to even fully fund this thin budget for 2019. The IRGC Cyber Command is now low on cash, and the IRGC has told Iraq's Shia militia groups that they should start looking for new sources of revenue. Today, this morning, the IMF revised its economic outlook for Iran and forecasted a GDP contraction of 9.5%. We anticipate that in this year, fiscal year, Iran could be in as much as a 12% negative GDP contraction. So the regime does face a choice. It can act like a country or it can act like a cause. Iran must change its behavior and start to act like a normal nation, or it will watch its economy continue to decline. Our policy is at its core a diplomatic and an economic one. This administration does not seek armed conflict with Iran. We are relying on American pressure and American diplomacy, economic pressure and American diplomacy, to raise the costs on Iran and force meaningful behavior change. Unfortunately, Iran has responded to our diplomacy with violence and kinetic force. In recent months, Iran has launched a series of panicked attacks, what Secretary Pompeo has called panicked aggression, to intimidate the world into halting our pressure. Iran was responsible for the attacks at the port of Fujairah, the assault on 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman, and the attack on Saudi oil facilities in Abqaiq. Iran's message to the international community is quite clear. And this is important that I think people understand the regime's paradigm. Iran's message to the world is, if you do not allow us to conduct our normal level of terror, then we will behave even more badly until you do. Iran has long used its nuclear program in this way and for this reason. The world ought to recognize this extortion when it sees it. When the world comes together to push back against Iran, and we saw this recently in the context of FIFA, which put enormous pressure on Iran because it was denying women from attending soccer matches. And FIFA stood up to the regime, made very clear that there needed to be a change, and for the first time, Iranian women were admitted recently into a game. They were segregated from everybody else, and they were kept in a cordoned area. But it is an example of imposing, sort of isolating Iran and pressuring Iran can achieve the kind of behavior change that we're talking about. When the world comes together to push back Iran, we do see a change in its behavior. And this administration will do its part, and we are succeeding in having others join us. On the Monday of the UN General Assembly, this was shortly after the attacks in Abqaiq, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom called for Iran to accept negotiations on its nuclear program, ballistic missiles, and regional activity. This has been the position of the United States for 2.5 years, and we were very pleased to see the E3 call on new negotiations so that we can have a new and comprehensive deal. I think it is very much the case that the Iran nuclear deal has come at the expense of missile nonproliferation in the Middle East. I think I have said to this committee probably a year ago, I know I said it a year ago when I was at the United Nations, if we do not restore deterrence against Iran's missile proliferation, we are accumulating risk of a regional war. And we saw this then 1 year later in the Iranian attack on Saudi. We remember that the longest suffering victims of the Iranian regime are the Iranian people. We wish nothing more for the Iranian people than a future with a truly representative government and a much better future with the American people and the Iranian people. Chairman Risch, Ranking Member Menendez, and other members of the committee, I thank you for devoting a hearing on the subject of Iran, and I'm happy to answer your questions.